So what influences price per pound? We're going to talk a little bit about breeds and breed types, but the first thing is muscle. Muscle plays an important role in price per pound because we are in the red meat business. So cattle that are heavier muscled are typically going to receive a higher price per pound when we market those cattle at weaning, because muscle, again, is genetically determined there. And so where do we evaluate muscle in cattle? And we've discussed this in bulls, and it's kind of the same concept. We look in the round, we look in the top. Cattle that are heavier muscled are going to be wider based. And as you can see in this particular steer in this picture, even though he's a fat steer and mature, you can see he's very wide at the bottom and it goes all the way to the top. So he's very square from behind. Whereas a steer that's lighter muscled will stand narrower based and will look more like a V from behind, and we'll show you an example here in just a minute. The thing is that you got to remember is that look for shape and expression of muscle. Cattle that are lighter muscled are always going to look flatter in their muscle design. So two different steers here, the red steer on the left versus the gray steer on the right. Definitely some differences in those type of animals. Both of them are fat steers ready for market. The one on the right is certainly the heavier muscled compared to the one on the left. And you could see, as we mentioned earlier, the one on the left looks more like a V from behind. He's maybe wide in his hooks and pin bones, but he's he angles down sharply at his base when his feet are standing close together there. Versus the one on the right is very square. And that translates to the feeder cattle. So as we look at that slide with the Hereford looking steer and the Charolais cross looking steer, you can imagine if we rewind those animals and we go back to when we weaned them off the cow at 500 pounds, you can bet that the steer on the right was wider based, heavier muscled at that time, just like the one on the left was narrower made, lighter muscled, just a flatter muscle pattern. So again, genetically determined between those two. And so as we look at these pictures, the USDA muscle scores for feeder cattle, the one on the left, the number one, probably would go to the gray steer we just saw a picture of, versus the red steer, the Hereford marked steer, probably would fit somewhere around that muscle score 3 when it was a feeder calf. And so that's some things that we think about. And so you can see as we go from a USDA muscle score 1 to a 4, and you imagine the amount of muscle that would be hanging on that carcass, there's going to be a big difference between these two. And so there's going to be more yield and more productivity in those cattle because of that. The calf that's on the right, all the way, the muscle score number 4, is probably a dairy influence, or could be even a longhorn influence steer. And again, those cattle are discounted in the beef, traditional beef marketing scenario, mainly because they just don't have the red meat yield that some of the other breeds that are carrying more muscle on that skeleton there. This is some data, and I'll show you several of these slides that are from Oklahoma and Arkansas. Smith from 2000, Dr. Troxel from 2002 and 2005. Dr. Troxel was on faculty here with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension before he moved to Arkansas years and years ago. But this is looking at what they did was they evaluated thousands of head of feeder cattle through some livestock markets. And then they graded those cattle, those weaned calves, and they looked at the prices. And they looked at muscle score, they looked at frame, color, gender, bulls versus steers, and they figured out what the average prices were for those cattle. And so, again, markets have changed a lot from 2000 to current day market conditions, but we're going to compare the muscle scores back to the base muscle score of 1, so the highest muscle score that we see. So number 1 would be a heavy muscled feeder steer, number 4 would be a very light muscled. And so as we look at that, and I went in and just did a simple average of those 3 studies, the difference between a 1 and a 2 was $7.74 per pound. A 1 and a 3 was $21 and $30 between a 1 and a 4. So from a producer perspective, in most cases you're looking at trying to shoot for that target of a 1 to no lower than a number 2 muscle score in those cattle because of the big price difference there as we move on to a 3 and a 4 there.